Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will look at topics for the PowerBASIC console compiler. Today we will look at creating CGI web applications to handle forms. Today we're going to develop not one, but two web CGI applications. This will allow us to present to the user a web page containing a web form. And our second application is going to allow us to capture the information the user has entered on this form and save it to our web server. So let's go and create some new code. Here is the template to our new CGI application. We're going to call this one CGI Demo 2. And it's going to compile to an application called Time Clock. And we're including three libraries: the standard Windows 32 API, the PB-CGI, and our PB File Handling Routines library. As you can guess from the name of the executable, the purpose of this web page is to capture a user's clock in or clock out. So as we did in the last video, we're going to create a web page from within this application. And we'll do that from within the PB main function by calling another function called createWebPage version 1. This part of the application is going to be very straightforward. As we did in the previous video, we're going to load up a template. We're going to populate one tag within that template, and we're going to display that back to the user. So here is the skeleton of our new function, creating a local variable called HTML. We're going to populate this HTML variable by the content of a form template file. We'll create this form template in a moment, but the purpose of using a template is to save having to put a lot of functionality inside the application. We merely have to load the template and replace any tags within that template. And the plan for this template is to have only a single tag, and that is the time tag. So using the PowerBASIC replace command, we can replace that tag with the actual time using $. And having replaced that tag, we can then write our result back to the browser to allow the user to see it. And we're going to use one of the functions in the PB-CGI library. And that function is called writeCGI, which takes a single parameter, which is our HTML variable. So let's go and create this form template. So here is our blank page for the form template. We're going to set up a number of HTML tags here to allow us to display this web page to the user. First of all, the standard HTML and head tags. This allows us to set a title for the tab on your browser. Next, we're going to define the body of the web page. And I'm going to start off by setting a table at the top of this web page to allow us to display a title and a graphic to the user. We're using the table command here, and within the table tag, we're defining the background color. And also, we're using an attribute of width. This is to allow the table to be 90% of the width of the web page. Next, we're defining a row. This is also 90% of the width. Its style is color white. And we're putting the text clocking in or out in a large font. And then on our second cell on that first row, we're setting the image we wish to display. And we're defining this as in a subfolder called graphics, and it's going to be a file called logogsf.png. I'm also using the width and the height attributes to allow the browser to assign a certain amount of space on the web page for this graphic. And then we're closing the table off. So as I said, there's going to be a time tag within this page. And we'll define that in the next line. So it will display the words time clocking service followed by the time. And for the moment, we'll close off the body and the HTML tags at this point. So let's just save that file. Now we will be coming back later on to insert the form commands inside this template, but this is enough to keep us going for the moment. So we have created our application and we've created our template. So let's now copy this template over to the web server. And we're going to copy this template into the data folder. So we have a shared drive on our web server, so we'll just drag this file across. And we can attempt to compile our web application to ensure it compiles cleanly. And there is our timeclock.exe. We will copy that across to our web server. So let's try loading this dynamic web page. And there we are, we've entered the URL for our time clock executable. If we hit the enter button, it will come up with our page. It gives us the title, clocking in or out. It has the time clocking service and the time. And we also have the graphic at the top of the page. So we have done the basics to display a page to the user. So what we need to do next is put a form on this page to allow the user to fill it in. Because we've created a form template, we can do that in the form template text file, rather than having to change the application. So let's go back to the form template. What more do we need to add to allow us to have some form fields on this page? Well, we need to use the form tag. And here is our form tag, and we're giving it a name. The method in this case is post, so that when the submit button is actually clicked on this web form, it will execute another application on our web server. And the action we wish it to do is to launch this executable. This is our second executable, which we're going to create in a moment, and we're calling that CGI save clocking. It will accept all the data that's coming off the form and allow us to do something with it. But before we create that second application, we'll need to define some fields. These are the fields the user is going to be filling in on that form. So we'll embed this in a table to give us a little control over what appears on the screen. And there is our first field. We're creating the table, we're creating a new row in the table, and we're creating a data field within this table, and we're putting the words username in that field. Next, we need to define the type of input we're allowing the user to make. In this case, it's entering text. We're giving it a title, calling that enter name, and we're giving it a size. This is the number of characters that this field will accept. And we need to give it a name. This is a name it will be passed back to the web server as. And the initial value is going to be blank, and closing off the input tag at the end. If we save that, and if we copy this template onto the server, there is our updated template. And if we copy that into the data folder, and if we refresh our web page, there is our new username field. As you can see, it's large enough to accept 60 characters. So I want to add a second field on this one to allow the user to enter their payroll ID. So once more back to our template. So we're going to do exactly the same as we did before. We're using another row in the table and another data field with the words payroll ID in that field. Then we're defining another input type of text. The title, which will appear as a tooltip over it, is enter payroll ID. In this case, we're setting the size to be 6 characters. And the name of this field is going to be payroll. And it has a value initially of a 0-length string. So we can add quite a number of different types of fields to this form. But at some point, you'll want to give the user a button to allow them to submit the values they've entered back to the server. So the next stage is to add a submit button. And there is the input type equaling submit. Title is going to be click here to save your clockings. The value, which is the text on the button, is going to be the words submit decision. If this is the last field we want on that form, we can then close off this particular table and close off the form tag. So if we save that, and we copy that once more back to the web server. And having done that, if we refresh our time clock exe, and there are the two extra elements now on screen. We have the username, the payroll ID, and the button. If we click on the button in a moment, it will not give us any information because we have yet to create our executable. So let's now go and create this second executable. So we're going to call this executable savingclocking.bas. I've added an extra library in here because we're going to be doing some date manipulation. I'm also going to add a constant to this application to define the name of the server. Now we could pick this up dynamically from the machine it's running on, but for the moment we'll hardcode it. So in our PB main function, the first task we need to do is to work out what parameters we've actually got back from the user when they have clicked on the submit button. So we need to read an input. And as always, we're going to be needing some local variables. So the first of these is a parameter string. This will pick up the information that's come back from the browser. And we're going to be storing those parameters in an array. So we're going to be making use of some functions in that PBCGI library. The first of which is this function here, readCGI. It takes the information that's come back from the browser and puts it into this variable. Then we can count the number of parameters to see if anything did come back. For this particular application, we'll want the information that the user has entered. If no parameters have been provided at all, then we'll want to display some error message back to the user. If the user has just clicked the submit button but not entered any details into the form, we will get some information back, but that will only be the names of the fields. So our first test is on this p variable. So if this is anything other than 0, then we have some parameters. So we're going to prepare an output array, and we'll create some more local variables. So having created this output string array, we now need to populate it by stepping through the first array, the params array, because our data needs to be decoded. And to do that, we're going to use a for next loop, and we'll populate our output array using another function within that PBCGI library called decodeCGI. This will put the information into each element of the params array, ready for us to actually use. If any of these are completely blank, then we will exclude them. So we're only interested in lines with data in them. So we're going to be building up this str data variable, as we will use this to push the information out to a file on the web server. This would allow us at some point later on to process these user requests, which could be done by a third application, but doesn't necessarily need to be done in real time. As you will guess, there are two key pieces of information on the web page the user is entering into. One is the user's name, and the second is the payroll ID. Ideally, we want to pick them out of the information that's come back. So we're going to do that using the parse command. The data that's held in this element of the array is in two parts. The first part to the left of the equal sign is going to be the name of the field, which will either be username or payroll. The bit to the right of the equal sign, the second element, is going to be the value the user has entered in. So these lines of code will populate these two variables, the username data and the payroll data. So once we get to the end of all the parameters, we can then test to ensure that both the username and the payroll are actually populated. If they are not, then data is missing and we'll want to reject the user's submission. So we can test for that using a quite simple if command testing the trimmed value of the username and the payroll variables. If either of these is equal to a blank, then there is some data missing. And we can pass information back to the user by using the stdout command. Using the location as the beginning of this line, we're specifying a web page to display to the user. So this is going to be a static web page. So let's create this HTML file now. As you can see, it's coming out of the data folder. So this is very similar to what we've done already. It has the HTML and body tags at the beginning. We're setting a table here to specify the header at the top of the page, with the clocking in or out, and the logo. We're also displaying on the web page the words submission incomplete, missing data. And we're defining another form, in this case a very simple one, which is passing back control to the time clock executable. So if the user on the main page enters in no data and just hits the submit button, it will bring them back to this page. And when they click the try again button, it will take them back to timeclock.exe. So we will copy this HTML file into our web server. Note that as this web page is a directory down from the graphics folder, we've had to use the 2 dots to go up a folder before going back into the graphics to display the logo. It's important to remember that your paths here are relative. So we've handled the condition where the user does not key any information into the supplied fields. So next we want to take the date and time and add this to our data variable, since we want to capture the date and time that the user has submitted their clocking. This is done quite easily by appending to the end of the data variable. We'll have the word date and equals, and in this case a function to return the date in UK format. Should you wish to return this in US format, you merely have to change this to date $. And our second line is storing the time. The time, of course, will have the colon in it between the hour and the minute and the second. I'm going to use the time to form up the name of the file we wish to create. So we're going to use a replace command here to replace the colon in the time string. Otherwise, Windows would be unable to save the file. So now that we have that sorted, we can define the name of the file we wish to create with all the web data in it. And here is the path and name of our data file. We're picking the exe path, the data folder, and we're using a function within our date library to reverse the UK date as a number, so that will be year, month, day, with no delimiters between each field. We're giving that a parameter of the UK date, and we're following that with an underline, and then the time, which now has no colons within it. And we're going to call another function in our libraries to save this string as a file. This takes 2 parameters, firstly the name and the path to the file, and secondly the data you wish to place within that file. If we get this far, then we have successfully taken the data the user has entered and saved it to a file. So we can now pass back a confirmed message to our user. So we're going to use exactly the same technique as we used for one where the user did not enter any information in. So we've now got another HTML page called confirmed. And if we look at that, it will look remarkably similar. We have the heading at the top of the page as before. We have the words submission confirmed. And we're placing a small form on that page to allow the user to do another clocking should they wish to do so, by redirecting them back towards the time clock executable. So we will copy that onto our web server. So the last thing I'm going to put into this function is an else condition. This will pass back the incomplete information if we received no parameters whatsoever. So let's compile that to ensure it compiles cleanly, which it does. And we'll also want to copy this recompiled executable onto our web server. So there is our save clocking executable. Let's now copy that onto the web server. So we should have everything in place now to test this out. So let's go back and reload our time clock. So if we hit Submit Decision without keying anything in, that should give us Submission Incomplete, missing data. If we click Try Again, it should take us back to the time clock. So if we enter in a username, and we'll put in a payroll ID, and hit Submit Decision, it says the submission has been confirmed. So let's have a look at the web server in our data folder to see if we have a file. And there we do have a file. If we open that up, we will see we have 4 lines of information in this file. The 2 fields that were on the form, username and payroll, with their values, and 2 extra lines, one with the current date and one with the current time. If we try once more and do another clocking and hit Submit Decision, and if we go back to the server, we will see there is now a second file. If we open that up, we'll see it's got test user, the payroll number, and the date and time. So if we do one more test, we will enter the username but no payroll ID. And it should come back Submission Incomplete. And it will have added no extra files to our web server. So in summary, what we've achieved today is we have created 2 web CGI applications. The first is using a template to display a web form to the user, asking them to enter their username and their payroll ID. We've also added a button on that form, which when the user clicks on it, it will trigger the execution of a second executable on the web server. This will accept the data parameters coming in, interrogate them, and decide whether they are valid or not. If they are not valid, the user gets back an incomplete page message. If both fields have been entered, it will return a confirmed web page. In both cases, it allows the user to go back to the original web page to allow them to attempt to either key again or key a new clocking. So these are 2 very straightforward and simple CGI web applications. And the approach of storing the majority of the web page in templates does allow you a great deal of flexibility for upgrading without having to recompile your binaries. Hopefully you'll find this code and these techniques useful in your applications, but that's it for today. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching today's video. Please feel free to click on the link in the description below to discover more videos.